Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 3726. Today's date is November 26, 2025. It's been almost like a night at 9:35 p.m. All right, let's just jump into the question. Let's go. All right, the question is, what if business operated without hierarchies? Oh, that is a really good question. All right, first of all, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? What if question is always really interested way to give the answer. It kind of like force you to think about that reality. And when you try to think about that reality, when you try to kind of like simply try to create that reality, I'm kind of like utilizing my information and knowledge and experience that I've been through. And it somehow it kind of like feel really good. It's not a kind of like a typical question and answer where answer is a kind of like a bit really stagnant. Like what is exactly 2 plus 2 is equal to 4? No. It's a kind of like a question that why 1 plus 3 is not 5. When I ask this question, then you are kind of like evaluate what is actually meaning of 1, what is actually meaning of 3, what is actually meaning of plus, what is actually meaning of equal to. So when you try to evaluate that thing, you kind of like know more regarding about numbers. So that's why this what if question. What if question is kind of like somewhat something kind of like simply try to ask question to the question itself, and which is somewhat kind of like simply really good. Oh yeah. Disclaimer: the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong either. It's raw, it's unfiltered, it's just my opinion. So do not believe in any kind of information that I'm saying, or do not seek for any kind of information that I'm saying. It's just my opinion, and opinion are subjective. Alright, now should we jump into the question? Alright. Now regarding about the question says that what if the business operated without hierarchies? Okay. So what exactly is this question? Well, basically is this thing, the question actually asks that what if all the kind of like a businesses and everything would kind of like simply have hierarchies. Like let me give you context. Okay. In every company, take every company. Okay. Every company has its own kind of like assembly structure regarding about chairman, regarding about director, vice president, okay, managers, team leaders. These are kind of like assembly creates a pyramid. Okay, in the like basically in the top section of the pyramid is a CEO. Okay, then there is a kind of like assembly vice president. Then after that director. Then after that kind of like something the manager. Then after that team leader. And then after that employee. These are kind of like a somewhat something structure. By the way, in some certain department we have kind of like a different structure too. Okay, but this is what somewhat kind of like a structure are usually associated in every kind of like a business. Okay, now the question says that what if those structure are not exist? Like basically there is no pyramid at all. Like everyone are kind of like doing the things that they want. Like basically there is no hierarchy, nothing really at all. So what is exactly that world? Now before I ask this question, I just have to understand what's wrong with the pyramid. Okay, what's wrong with the hierarchy? Okay, like basically is this thing, let's just understand first what's wrong with the hierarchy. Okay, now hierarchy means what? Hierarchy means like that, let's just say I am a kind of like a something the employee, okay, of the particular company. Okay, and I need a kind of like a something 2 days off, like a basically let's just say my sister has a wedding. Okay, and I need a kind of like a couple of days to kind of like a for myself, or kind of like a wedding and things like that. Okay, so I went to my manager, says that ma'am, I won't be able to come for at least 2 weeks because of the I have wedding and things like that. Then your manager says no, you cannot take 2 weeks of holiday. You can take at least like a 1 week of holiday, but you can't take 2 weeks of holiday. Okay, now basically when this thing actually happened, you just kind of like feel really frustrated. You just feel like that why this manager is actually exist, why I'm kind of like somebody taking the permission to kind of like somebody to leave and things and that. So that's why most of the kind of like somebody people thinks that hierarchy is not a really good thing. Because of that you are kind of like wanted to do a work, but sometime kind of like somebody your higher above person won't let you do that work, or won't let you give that freedom and things like that. And that's why this kind of like a hierarchy feels like people kind of like a think that hierarchy shouldn't supposed to be good. Like sometimes it kind of like creates a problem regarding about you don't really get the holidays, or sometimes you are kind of like doing a work more than its time. Okay, yeah. So you kind of like feel that this hierarchy shouldn't supposed to be kind of like assembly, right? Okay, yeah. There is also another thing that, okay, yeah, being a hierarchy means like that you will have kind of like a little less opportunity to kind of like a rise and things like that. Yeah. And that's why other people think that hierarchy is also really not that good. Okay, yeah. Now since then people are kind of like a think that hierarchy is not really good, that thing. Now, is that exactly true? Is that exactly true? Like basically is this thing that hierarchy is not kind of like that true or not? Well, let me give you context. I also kind of like assembly work at corporate sector, and I also kind of like assembly get a lot of kind of like assembly frustrated regarding about the manager and things like that. Okay, yeah. Sometimes I didn't really get kind of like assembly holidays. Sometimes kind of like even if I kind of like off, still I kind of like assembly do work for almost like a 10-12 hour and things and that. Like basically I just feel like that fuck. Okay, yeah. And it kind of like feel really wrong to me to having a hierarchy and things like that. So basically let's just imagine that what if we kind of like didn't really have this kind of like a hierarchy? What if there is no kind of like somebody, no one is actually higher and things like that? So how does that particular person, can you think like that particular structure where hierarchy is not even exist? Then what would be that particular? Okay, so imagine, okay, particular context. Okay, so I'm trying to imagine. Okay, so I was actually kind of like I'm trying to explain kind of like only my point of perspective, because my experience. Okay, I kind of like a work at particular company where kind of like somebody, we are kind of like a designer. Okay, CAD modeler, computer aided design modeler. Okay, basically we kind of like a design on AutoCAD, Creo, Katia. These are kind of like simply designer software. Okay, what we do actually is that we kind of like assembly create a kind of like a particular structure, or kind of like a particular kind of like we kind of like assembly create a virtual environment of that particular site. Let's just say that Mahindra assembly line. Okay, like there is a Mahindra new assembly line. Okay, so in that particular assembly line, that like they wanted to create another assembly line. Okay, imagine. Okay, let's just explain that simple as possible as you can. You are the owner of the company. You are the owner of the Mahindra car manufacturing company. Okay, now basically is this thing, you have a plant, and in this plant you are kind of like a manufacturer the SUV cars. Okay, but the problem is that this is the kind of like assembly line for the SUV car. You cannot able to manufacture the trucks. Right? Like basically if you wanted to manufacture the truck, then you need a completely different assembly line. Okay, now basically is this thing, it's not so you can make the different assembly line, right? But you can't do this thing. It's not kind of like a thing that you just kind of like make the assembly line as it is. No, when you try to create something different assembly line, or kind of like a kind of like a different setup, then you just have to think about every possible perspective. Like you think about the fire department, you think about how the assembly line work, you think about the kind of like a cable management, you think about the kind of like assembly, the tools and workstation, and which every employee should supposed to be work space and things, and as also kind of like assembly hazards. As well, like you just have to think about all the possible way that kind of like assembly your assembly line kind of like a work really seamlessly, as well as kind of like assembly with all the safeties and things and that, as well as kind of like assembly have a kind of like assembly get all the equipment as close to as possible, so that kind of like assembly that truck assembly line could kind of like happen very quickly. Okay, so you just have to create this particular assembly line. Okay, a truck assembly line. So you can't do this thing. So you just have to need a kind of like assembly, a virtual environment regarding about that. Okay, and how that virtual environment is actually happened is we are creating the virtual environment, like a CAD modeler who kind of like create the virtual environment regarding about that particular power plant. Okay, so how does it actually happen? Like basically is this thing na we actually have a kind of like assembly, a scanner. Okay, that scanner is actually kind of like assembly take a photo. Okay, take a photo of almost like a 360 camera, right? Kind of like take a photo, but it's not a kind of like a typical photo that you think it is. No, it's a kind of like assembly is this thing that we call them as a point cloud data. For the simple term, it's kind of like a photo, but it's not a photo, it's a kind of like a point cloud data. Okay, what exactly is this thing? What is exactly that? Okay, so when you kind of like take a photo, okay, the photo is a kind of like a very flat. Okay, means like that ki when you try to take a photo, it doesn't really have depth regarding about that ki where is your camera, how much kind of like a distance is from the subject, how much is kind of like a distance away from the background. Like basically it's just saying there is no kind of like a simply the difference between that. A photo is a kind of like complete flat photo. Okay, you don't really have that much kind of like assembly information. You can make kind of like a 3D photo by kind of like assembly. There are kind of like assembly in iPhone, they have kind of like assembly that key 3D photo feature that you could take a photo, but that is not that particular thing. It just kind of like assembly take a photo with multiple lenses, kind of like a feel like 3D, but it's not 3D, it's still flat. So basically is this thing, what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, the photo that you take is a kind of like a completely flat. Okay, yeah. But my device, like basically in my company, we have kind of like a device, a scanner. A scanner is actually take a photo, not just take a photo, it kind of like a take a information from that particular object from the scanner where it is kind of like assembly exists. Like let's just say, okay, yeah, I kind of like set up the scanner here. Okay, yeah, and it scan. So it scan the entire kind of like a surrounding area. It scan kind of like assembly where is this kind of like a tank, where is this kind of like a electric board, where is this. Okay, and as well as it kind of like a take the information regarding about that ki where is this kind of like assembly away from, like how much it away from the scanner. Okay, yeah, like this kind of like information is also captured by the scanner. Okay, yeah, and that scanner kind of like a creates a photo and that photo kind of like a creates a kind of like a point cloud data. In a photo is a kind of like a flat photo. Okay, yeah, but when you try to convert into the point cloud data, a point cloud data means like that a kind of like a combination of kind of like a trillions of pixel gather together and kind of like a creates a particular environment that is called point cloud data. Okay, yeah, like basically if you still not really understand what is actually point cloud data, then you just have to Google it. Okay, it's very hard to explain, but like basically it does have kind of like entire information regarding about the kind of like assembly, how that particular assembly line works and things like that. Okay, so what exactly happened? How is exactly this point cloud data is actually happened? Like basically the question is actually kind of like a different. I'm kind of like talking very different, but let me give you point of perspective. Okay, so basically this thing. Okay, so basically we kind of like have point cloud data, and in this point cloud data, that point cloud data is very rough. Like it just have kind of like information regarding about the where is particular object and what kind of like distance is actually exists, but there is no in detail information like what is actually the design of that particular product. Like let's just say there is a kind of like assembly the robotic arms. Okay, so there is no kind of like a detailed description regarding about that robotic arms and things and that, and nothing really at all. Okay, we just have kind of like a visual reference and we just have to create the 3D model. So basically what does it do? Okay, bunch of team kind of like went into that power plant. Okay, take the photo regarding about this and that, take the scanner. They have kind of like a multiple scanners. Like it just not just a scan, one scan. They have kind of like assembly thousands of scan of each kind of like assembly, each everything and things like that. Where they have kind of like a thousands of scan, we kind of like assembly collide all those thousands of scan in one single kind of like a format, and we kind of like create the point cloud data. Okay, now we actually utilize that point cloud data to kind of like create the 3D modeling. Okay, and in the 3D modeling we kind of like create every object, like basically cable tray, fire hazard, control panel. Okay, everything from floor to safety to guardrail to kind of like robots to kind of like assembly the structure, everything we actually kind of like a reverse engineering regarding about everything regarding about how the kind of like a things is kind of like a assembly look like that. Okay, and when we have kind of like a 3D model, then then it kind of like assembly very easy to kind of like engineer regarding about how should we supposed to design that thing. So what should we supposed to do is that when we kind of like assembly make that particular, when we scan that particular entire 3D model, then what we do is that we try to kind of like do the simulation regarding about the way that we wanted to create the assembly line. Let's just say that we kind of like assembly have that scan data regarding about the SUV assembly line. Okay, like basically in that assembly line SUV is actually created. Okay, but we wanted to kind of like make a trucks. Okay, so what do we supposed to do is that we try to simulate on the 3D model. Okay, and when you try to simulate, we kind of like face the problem regarding about that this assembly line is bit more shorter, so make the structure a little bit bigger. Okay, when you make the structure a little bit bigger, so there are a lot of components are kind of like deflected too, so we just have to face that thing, clean that stuff, and then try to arrange, like there is a kind of like a failure and kind of like a fix that thing again and try to fix that thing again and kind of like assembly make sure that kind of like assembly line are a bit more better for kind of like assembly for truck assembly line. Okay, yeah. So there is kind of like a lot of failure will gonna happen. We try to kind of like make it kind of like a even more better to kind of like we try to simulate that thing. Yeah, it's a kind of like a simulation for kind of like somebody face the problem, try to figure it out again, and kind of like make the assembly line as much as bigger and things like that, as much as better in every possible way regarding about the safety, security, as well as kind of like a productivity, kind of like assembly for the equipments, for the assembly line, and kind of like a workstations and everything. Okay, it's kind of like everything should supposed to be designed and stuff like that. Oh my god, I'm kind of like explaining a lot of stuff. So it's a lot of things. Okay, yeah. Like in this computer model, we just have to kind of like everything should supposed to be actually design, simulate, and things like that and that. It's a lot of things, and there is kind of like only hundreds of people actually kind of like only working on that. Okay, yeah. By the way, I am just a kind of like a 3D modeler. I just kind of like make the design. I'm not actually doing the simulation. Simulation part is actually designed by the simulation part is actually done by the simulation team. Okay, they kind of like a simulation team kind of like simulate the entire kind of like a structure and things and assembly line. God knows what they do. Okay, yeah, but they have kind of like a really cool job regarding over the simulation, but whatever. So my job is a kind of like assembly, let's just say a 3D modeling. Okay, so what I do is that whatever I kind of like have point cloud data, so in that point cloud data I kind of like assign some sort of task. Let's just say what kind of like a task that assign, I have kind of like assigned that control panel. Okay, control panel or cable tray. So basically cable tray and control panel are kind of like somewhat something associated with the electrical equipments. Okay, so I kind of like am responsible for that. So I kind of like take the point cloud data, manage with the kind of like a system, kind of like simply have a proper unit and things and that, and then try to create that particular point cloud data, kind of like try to create the kind of like assembly the control panel, how it kind of like looks and things and that we kind of like design and things, and we kind of like place that particular control panel in the respective area. Okay, yeah. So there is a lot of things. Okay, yeah. Oh my god, I just try to explain everything. Okay, so what exactly is this thing? Okay, yeah. So when we try to create that particular stuff, okay, there is a kind of like assembly is this thing, because this is kind of like work that actually happened. Now regarding about the question says that can we able to kind of like make that without hierarchy? Like basically is this thing in the hierarchy, what exactly happened, how we kind of like do the work. So basically is this thing, we have a team leader. Okay, yeah. In the team leader, under the team leader there are almost like 4 or 5 people. Okay, yeah. So basically is this thing that if I'm the team leader, I have kind of like 4 or 5 people, and basically what I do, what is actually the team leader responsible for? Team leader are responsible for kind of like assembly a part of particular structure. Let's just say, okay, yeah, what exactly is this thing? That we actually have a kind of like a point cloud data regarding about, let's just say 10,000 square feet, 10,000 or 10,000, or maybe let's just say like a very big point cloud data. Okay, yeah. So basically we kind of like assembly, what does it do? We kind of like assembly separate that point cloud data from section 1, section 2, section 3, like basically this, and these kind of like assembly the point cloud data are kind of like separated to the team leader. Okay, yeah. Like this kind of like a section A kind of like to do the this team leader, and this team leader kind of like handle this section, this team leader handle this section. Okay, yeah. Now each team leader had his kind of like assembly own kind of like a people, whole kind of like a employee, like let's just say 5 people are kind of like assembly kind of like a doing under the one team leader. Okay, yeah. Now basically what does employee's task? Employee task is kind of like a design everything in that particular section. Okay, control panels, kind of like assembly the control panel, cable tray, pipes, structure, everything we kind of like a design. Okay, yeah. And team leader are responsible for everything regarding about that, kind of like everything exactly match with the point cloud data. Okay, yeah. Like basically every team leader kind of like do the thing. Okay, yeah. Now basically is this thing, what kind of like a team leader has power? Team leader has a power that kind of like somebody is this thing that make sure that particular section should supposed to be happen respective amount of time. Okay, like basically we also have a deadline. It's not that we have kind of like a project and we just kind of like try to do this thing forever. No, we kind of like send this particular project to the client as quickly as possible as it can. So basically is this thing that we have kind of like particular deadline. So each kind of like a section should supposed to be happen quickly as possible as it can. Okay, yeah. So basically that team leader has a kind of like a responsibility to kind of like somebody handle the task to the people who kind of like somebody really good at that thing. Like I'm kind of like really good at structure, cable tray, like every 3D modeling and things like that. Okay, yeah. Now, basically, this is the kind of like a power that team leader has. Okay, yeah. Now, manager, what kind of like a manager has a power? Manager is kind of like a manage the entire team. Okay, yeah. Like basically, is this thing a team means like how many? Like basically, there are almost like a 4 or 5 team leader. Okay, yeah. Each team leader has kind of like a 4 or 5 people. So almost like a, let's just say 40-50 people are actually a team. Okay, yeah. And that team is actually managed by the a manager. Okay, yeah. That is called team manager or a manager. Okay, now what is actually that manager are kind of like responsible for? Manager are responsible for entire kind of like assembly, entire work. Okay, like basically that work is kind of like really good or not. Okay, let me give you a perspective. Sometimes manager are kind of like a bit more different. Sometimes manager are responsible, some manager are responsible for work, some manager are responsible for the kind of like assembly, the managing the team. Okay, let me give you context. Okay, let's just say we have kind of like a 2 different manager. One manager are kind of like responsible for work, like basically how is exactly work is actually happened, things happen, kind of like a decide that which team leader has kind of like a done the work very fast and things like that. Like that manager are kind of like a responsible for only work and things like that. Okay, only work. Okay, but there is a different kind of, there is also another manager who kind of like a manage regarding about like a presentee or kind of like a somebody the get the salary every day, or kind of like somebody assign the holiday or assign the kind of like somebody is this thing that when we should supposed to work and things like that. So they are kind of like a different manager too. Okay, in my kind of like assembly there are 2 manager. One manager are associated with the client work, with the work and things like that. Another manager are kind of like associated with the kind of like assembly the kind of like a work done, kind of like assembly how many projects are kind of like doing this thing, or kind of like assembly how much presently that you have, how much absentee that you have, how much work that you do, or everything. Okay, and this is kind of like a manager. Okay, and then after that we didn't really have that much VP or things like that, because my company is not really that much big. So after the kind of like a manager, we kind of like see the chairman. Okay, and we kind of like see the chairman, because my team is like, my company is not really that much big. Okay, so this is the kind of like a hierarchy cycle that we have. Okay, now question is that what if kind of like we didn't really have that hierarchy, then what would be that particular world? Then probably is this thing, if you don't really have the hierarchy, then problem is that everyone are kind of like responsible for their work and things like that. They're kind of like focusing on the work, kind of like make sure that work is really good and things like that. Like basically is this thing as an employee are not directly associated with the client. Like basically our kind of like director and our kind of like chairman and our kind of like manager are only associated with the client as a team leader, and we will not directly associate with the client. We will not have authority to kind of like talk to the client and things like that. If kind of like something happen, if we have some sort of issues and things like that, we will kind of like raise the issue and kind of like do the kind of like communication through emails and things like that. But most of the kind of like talk is actually happen through the manager level to the chairman level. As a team leader and as an employee, shouldn't supposed to have that much power to kind of like talk to the client, nothing really at all. Okay, so in this particular without hierarchy things, like basically what is actually happened that employee has a kind of like every power regarding about everything. Like basically is this regarding about work, regarding how do you supposed to work and things like that, as well as kind of like talk to the client and what kind of like a client expectation and how do you supposed to kind of like provide that expectation regarding about things and that. Okay, but this only thing is actually happened with the kind of like some employee knows everything regarding about design, regarding about everything, regarding about managing the people and things and that. And it's not kind of like a thing that every person kind of like somebody really good at that. I'm kind of like living in India, and probably is this thing every people are not really that much skillful. Obviously after some certain time that particular person bit really skillful, but still it kind of like takes time. Until that particular period of time, that particular person should supposed to be kind of like somebody that follow the hierarchy, because the hierarchy is kind of like somebody solve the multiple problems regarding about if the kind of like an employee is not really good at designing and things like that, that particular person has to be kind of like sent into the training. Okay, so basically that particular person will kind of like do the training and things and that to kind of like make sure he's really good at that. Okay, team leader kind of like somebody understand that okay, this person is really good, then probably that particular person assign into the kind of like somebody team, and that team leader kind of like give them particular task and things like that. Okay, so basically is this thing what I'm trying to tell you is this thing that every employee kind of is really not good at that particular managing things and that, and kind of like handling power and stuff like that. So in this particular context, the hierarchy is kind of like really helpful for kind of like understand regarding about how the company work and how the kind of like work is actually happen and things and that. Also regarding about that, like basically this thing, the hierarchy is kind of like something really essential for kind of like a work management and things like that. Like every person comes from the very different background, different kind of like understanding regarding about the work and things like that. So it is really essential for managing them. Okay, yeah. Let's just say that if I didn't really have kind of like a hierarchy, if I didn't really have, then probably what exactly happened that probably is this thing, I will not gonna do any kind of like a work until and unless it's kind of like something really essential. If the kind of like a client are kind of like somebody at behind of me kind of like say that I need this work, and you are kind of like doing the work at the very late stage, and probably is this thing that you are not kind of like doing the work properly. Because of that you wanted to complete this work as soon as possible as you can. Because of that there is no kind of like pressure is actually created. Okay, yeah. But when you follow the hierarchy, then you actually kind of like creating pressure from the day one. Okay, yeah. And you have to kind of like simply prove yourself every single day to kind of like make you work really, really good at that. Not okay, yeah. And this is what kind of like a really good advantage. Like basically this thing, at some certain point kind of like people are kind of like think that hierarchy is not really good. We are kind of like facing a lot of problems and things and that. But it's somewhat something kind of like something kind of like simply build you to kind of like become better and things like that, which is kind of like really good for corporate sector. Because in the corporate sector you just have to prove every single day regarding about how good you are. Okay. Why am I talking really fast? I don't know why, but I'm kind of like talking really fast. Okay, yeah. So basically, is this thing without hierarchy is really essential for every possible scenario, because hierarchies kind of like not only give you the kind of like some reason for it kind of like somebody build you up like basically from the bottom. Okay, yeah. Like basically hierarchy should supposed to be follow, because there is no confusion at all. Like every person are kind of like responsible for their work and things like that. If something happened, we will kind of like point out that which actually kind of like is responsible for that particular work. If the kind of like somebody doesn't really have hierarchy, then who do we supposed to be responsible for that? Who do you supposed to be responsible? Another thing is that chaos will gonna happen. If the kind of like people are really good at that, or if the people are kind of like really experienced regarding about work and things like that, then probably without hierarchy might gonna work. But probably when you kind of like somebody managing almost like hundreds of people, then probably you need a kind of like a particular structure regarding about which how many people would have how many power and things and that, and what kind of like do with this power, and how they supposed to kind of like manage the people and things like that. Because it's somewhat something really very unique in itself. Okay, because let me tell you one thing, managing people and leading people are kind of like a really much essential, and for that particular purpose hierarchy is very much essential. Like basically it kind of like somebody stop the confusion, it kind of like somebody creates the it's kind of like somebody is this thing responsible for who is actually responsible for what. Okay, yeah. And another thing is that everything is kind of like a follow very properly regarding about work, regarding about order, regarding about everything. Okay, if the chairman kind of like thinks that no, we should supposed to be kind of like do this way, then everyone kind of like follow that particular instruction regarding about the manager, regarding about VP, regarding about director, regarding about team leader, regarding about employee too. So this is what kind of like things is actually happened. So what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, the hierarchy is very much essential. Like basically this thing, it is also kind of like important that who actually hold the power in that particular company and things like that. So yeah, like basically what I'm trying to tell you is this thing that yes, hierarchy is very much essential, and without hierarchy confusion will gonna create, and there is a lot of chaos will gonna create. So that's why it's really matter that hierarchy is really much essential. Without hierarchy chaos will gonna happen. Yeah, definitely gonna happen. Without hierarchy is possible. It doesn't mean that it's not possible. It's possible, but when have kind of like a very less people. Let's just say that you are kind of like running a business of almost like a 5 people. So basically when you have 5 people in the business, probably you don't really need a hierarchy. Like basically all those 5 people are responsible for something, and they just have to do the work together. That's it. Okay, yeah. But basically is this thing, this is a kind of like early stage of the business. Okay, yeah. When you have almost like let's just say 5 or 10 people, that's it. But when you kind of like expand the business, probably you just have multiple people, and you need a proper structure regarding about the orders, and kind of like somebody regarding about the kind of like somebody flow of work and things and that. So yeah. So basically this thing, without hierarchy, chaos and confusion will gonna happen. There is nothing really kind of like somebody add any kind of like a value and things like that. Like basically this thing, without hierarchy there is something happen, there is something really good thing will gonna happen, but still for that particular purpose the employee and everything are kind of like really expert in what they are wanted to do and what kind of like things they do, but still it kind of like creates the confusion and things like that. So yes. Okay, so hierarchy is very much essential. Alright, this is it. I should supposed to be end here, and thank you.